You switched to vegetables because you wanted to do everything right, yet your digestion feels heavier, your energy dips in the afternoon, and your stomach seems more bloated than it did before. What if some of the foods you believe are protecting your health are quietly irritating your gut, interfering with mineral absorption, or triggering inflammation in ways no one explained to you? Before you load your plate again, there is something you need to understand. The belief that vegetables are automatically beneficial in unlimited amounts is deeply rooted in public health messaging, yet biology is more nuanced than slogans and food pyramids suggest. While vegetables contain fiber, phytonutrients, vitamins, and minerals that support long-term health, they also contain naturally occurring defense compounds that evolved to protect the plant from insects, fungi, and predators. These compounds are not inherently dangerous to humans, but they are biologically active, and in certain individuals or at certain doses, they can influence digestion, mineral balance, thyroid signaling, and immune responses in measurable ways. Plants cannot run from threats, so they rely on chemistry to survive, and many of these chemicals fall into categories often referred to as anti-nutrients. Anti-nutrients are substances that can interfere with the absorption or utilization of nutrients in the human body, especially when consumed in large quantities or in raw form. Examples include oxalates, phytates, lectins, and goitrogenic compounds, each of which interacts with human physiology differently depending on context, preparation method, and individual susceptibility. For instance, oxalates are organic acids found in certain leafy greens and vegetables that can bind to calcium and other minerals in the digestive tract, forming compounds that are less absorbable. This binding effect can be helpful in small amounts because it may reduce excess mineral absorption, yet in susceptible individuals it can contribute to reduced mineral availability or increase urinary oxalate levels, which is relevant for kidney stone formation. This does not mean that oxalate-containing vegetables are harmful to everyone, but it does mean that quantity, preparation, and personal risk factors matter. Phytates, commonly found in plant foods including seeds and some vegetables, can also bind minerals such as zinc, iron, and magnesium, reducing their bioavailability under certain dietary patterns. In balanced diets that include adequate mineral intake, this effect is often negligible, yet in individuals with marginal nutrient status, chronic digestive issues, or restrictive eating habits, the impact may become more significant over time. Scientific literature consistently shows that nutrient absorption is influenced not only by what you eat, but by what is eaten alongside it and how it is prepared. Lectins are another group of plant proteins that have received attention for their potential to irritate the gut lining when consumed in improperly prepared foods. While cooking significantly reduces lectin activity in most vegetables and legumes, large amounts of raw or undercooked plant foods may increase digestive discomfort in sensitive individuals. The key distinction is that sensitivity varies widely, and what is tolerated easily by one person may cause bloating, discomfort, or inflammatory symptoms in another. Goitrogenic compounds found in certain vegetables can also influence thyroid hormone regulation by interfering with iodine uptake in specific contexts. In individuals with adequate iodine intake and normal thyroid function, moderate consumption poses little concern, yet in those with existing thyroid vulnerability or iodine deficiency, large amounts of raw goitrogenic vegetables may contribute to hormonal imbalance. Research does not support blanket avoidance, but it clearly supports individualized awareness. The central message is not that vegetables are harmful, but that health is influenced by dose, preparation, and personal biology, rather than reputation alone. Nutritional science repeatedly demonstrates that the same compound can be beneficial in one context and problematic in another, depending on quantity and individual physiology. When digestive symptoms, mineral deficiencies, unexplained fatigue, or inflammatory discomfort appear, despite a vegetable-rich diet, it is scientifically reasonable to examine not only what is lacking, but also what may be in excess. Understanding this framework shifts the conversation from fear to precision, allowing you to evaluate vegetables not as universally good or bad, but as powerful biological inputs that must align with your specific metabolic needs. When you learn how these compounds function and how your body responds, you move from blindly following health trends to making informed, evidence-based decisions that support resilience rather than unintended strain. Oxalates. are naturally occurring organic compounds found in many plant foods, but their concentration varies dramatically between vegetables, with spinach, beet greens, Swiss chard, and certain leafy greens ranking among the highest sources in the modern diet. These compounds serve a protective function in plants, yet inside the human body they can bind to minerals such as calcium, magnesium, and iron in the digestive tract, forming insoluble crystals that are less easily absorbed into the bloodstream. This binding effect is not automatically harmful, but in individuals who consume large amounts of high oxalate vegetables daily, it can meaningfully influence mineral balance over time. When oxalate binds to calcium in the gut, the complex is typically excreted in stool, which may reduce calcium absorption from that meal, especially if dietary calcium intake is already marginal. In certain individuals, particularly those prone to kidney stones, absorbed oxalate can travel through the bloodstream and be excreted in the urine, where it may combine with calcium to form calcium oxalate crystals. Research consistently shows that calcium oxalate stones account for the majority of kidney stone cases, and dietary oxalate load can contribute to risk in susceptible populations. It is important to understand that not everyone who eats spinach will develop kidney stones, because risk depends on hydration status, gut microbiome composition, calcium intake, genetic predisposition, and overall dietary pattern. Certain gut bacteria, including species that degrade oxalate in the colon, help reduce the amount absorbed into circulation, yet antibiotic use, digestive disorders, or microbial imbalance may reduce this protective mechanism. When gut oxalate degradation declines, urinary oxalate levels can rise even without dramatic increases in intake. Beyond kidney stone risk, some emerging research suggests that high oxalate loads may contribute to symptoms such as joint discomfort or urinary irritation in sensitive individuals, although this area remains under investigation. The mechanism proposed involves microscopic crystal formation that may irritate tissues or trigger inflammatory signaling in predisposed people. While the evidence is not conclusive for the general population, it reinforces the principle that tolerance is individualized rather than universal. Another critical factor often overlooked is preparation method, because boiling high oxalate vegetables in water can significantly reduce their oxalate content, as soluble oxalates leach into the cooking liquid. Studies demonstrate that boiling spinach can reduce oxalate levels by a meaningful percentage, whereas steaming preserves more of the oxalate content due to minimal water contact. This distinction becomes highly relevant for individuals who consume large green smoothies made from raw spinach daily, because blending does not reduce oxalate concentration and may increase absorption by breaking down plant cell walls. Calcium intake during meals also plays a protective role, because adequate calcium in the gut binds oxalate before it can be absorbed, thereby lowering urinary oxalate levels. Clinical nutrition guidelines for kidney stone prevention often recommend pairing oxalate-containing foods with calcium-rich sources rather than eliminating vegetables entirely. This strategy highlights a core principle in nutritional science, which is that context within the meal often matters more than the isolated food itself. For individuals with a history of kidney stones, unexplained urinary discomfort, or mineral deficiencies despite high vegetable intake, it is reasonable to evaluate total oxalate exposure rather than assuming all greens are interchangeable. Rotating leafy greens, reducing reliance on extremely high oxalate varieties, cooking strategically, and maintaining hydration can significantly modify risk without sacrificing nutrient density. The goal is not fear-based avoidance, but intelligent adjustment grounded in physiology and research. When you understand how oxalates behave inside the body, the conversation shifts from blindly celebrating every green leaf to appreciating the biochemical complexity behind them. Knowledge allows you to preserve the benefits of vegetables while minimizing unintended consequences, which is the foundation of evidence-based nutrition rather than nutritional mythology. Cruciferous vegetables such as kale, broccoli, cabbage, Brussels sprouts, and cauliflower are widely praised for their cancer-protective phytochemicals, yet they also contain compounds that interact directly with thyroid physiology under certain conditions. These vegetables are rich in glucosinolates, sulfur-containing compounds that break down into biologically active metabolites, including isothiocyanates and thiocyanates, when the plant tissue is chopped or chewed. While these metabolites contribute to antioxidant and detoxification pathways, they can also compete with iodine uptake in the thyroid gland when consumed in very high amounts, particularly in raw form. The thyroid gland relies on iodine to synthesize the hormones thyroxine and triiodothyronine, which regulate metabolism, temperature control, energy production, and neurological function throughout the body. When iodine availability is reduced, either because dietary intake is insufficient or because uptake into the thyroid is inhibited, hormone production may decline, leading to compensatory thyroid enlargement or altered hormone signaling. Thiocyanates derived from glucosinolate breakdown can compete with iodine transport mechanisms in the thyroid, potentially reducing hormone synthesis in vulnerable individuals. It is critical to emphasize that this effect is dose-dependent and context-specific, because individuals with adequate iodine intake and normal thyroid function typically tolerate moderate cruciferous vegetable consumption without measurable disruption. Large Epidemiological studies do not demonstrate widespread thyroid dysfunction in populations that consume cooked cruciferous vegetables as part of balanced diets. However, research has documented that extremely high intake of raw cruciferous vegetables, particularly in iodine-deficient individuals, can exacerbate thyroid suppression or contribute to goiter formation. Cooking plays a significant role in modifying this biochemical interaction because heat deactivates the enzyme myrosinase, which is responsible for converting glucosinolates into their more active metabolites. Light steaming, boiling, or sautéing reduces goitrogenic activity while preserving many of the beneficial phytonutrients associated with these vegetables. This means that preparation method can dramatically influence physiological impact, transforming a potentially problematic food into one that is well tolerated and beneficial. Another layer of complexity involves the global prevalence of iodine deficiency, which remains a public health concern in certain regions and among individuals who avoid iodized salt or seafood. In the setting of marginal iodine intake, high raw cruciferous consumption may exert a stronger inhibitory effect on thyroid hormone production. Conversely, when iodine intake is sufficient, the competitive inhibition becomes less clinically significant because the gland has adequate substrate to maintain hormone synthesis. Clinical endocrinology recognizes that individuals with pre-existing hypothyroidism, autoimmune thyroiditis, or borderline iodine status may need to monitor intake of large quantities of raw, cruciferous vegetables. This does not imply permanent avoidance, but it does support thoughtful moderation and attention to overall iodine nutrition. Laboratory monitoring of thyroid-stimulating hormone and free thyroid hormones can provide objective guidance when symptoms such as fatigue, cold intolerance, hair thinning, or weight changes are present. Importantly, cruciferous vegetables also provide indole compounds and sulforaphane, which have been studied for their role in supporting cellular detoxification enzymes and reducing oxidative stress. The scientific conversation is therefore not about labeling these vegetables as harmful, but about recognizing that biological systems are interconnected and sensitive to imbalances. When intake becomes extreme or when nutrient context is inadequate, even beneficial foods can exert unintended physiological pressure. The central lesson is precision rather than panic, because thyroid health depends on a combination of iodine sufficiency, selenium status, overall dietary diversity, and appropriate vegetable preparation. By understanding the biochemical interaction between glucosinolates and iodine transport, you gain the ability to protect thyroid function without abandoning nutrient-dense foods that offer significant benefits. Evidence-based nutrition requires this level of nuance, especially when managing systems as delicate and influential as endocrine regulation. Nightshade vegetables such as tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, and white potatoes are staples in many cuisines, yet they contain naturally occurring alkaloids that can influence inflammatory signaling in certain individuals. Alkaloids such as solanine, chaconine, and capsaicin function as defense compounds within the plant, protecting it from pests and environmental stress. But in the human body, these compounds interact with nerve endings, gut receptors, and immune pathways in ways that may not be neutral for everyone. While the majority of people tolerate nightshades without measurable harm, a subset of individuals report symptom flares that correlate with intake, particularly in the context of autoimmune or inflammatory joint conditions. Solanine and related glycoalkaloids found in potatoes and eggplants are concentrated in the skin and in sprouted or green areas of the plant, and these compounds can affect cell membrane integrity when consumed in large quantities. Experimental data suggest that high concentrations of glycoalkaloids can increase intestinal permeability in laboratory models, which has led researchers to explore whether sensitive individuals may experience amplified immune activation when exposed chronically. Although normal dietary intake is far below toxic thresholds, repeated exposure in susceptible people may contribute to subtle digestive irritation or inflammatory signaling. Capsaicin, the compound responsible for the heat in chili peppers, activates specific pain receptors known as TRVP1 channels, which are involved in both pain perception and inflammatory responses. In many individuals, capsaicin has beneficial metabolic and circulatory effects, including improved blood flow and mild thermogenesis, yet in others it may aggravate gastrointestinal sensitivity or joint discomfort. The dual nature of capsaicin illustrates a broader principle in physiology, which is that compounds can be therapeutic in one context and irritating in another, depending on the underlying inflammatory state. Autoimmune conditions such as rheumatoid arthritis and inflammatory bowel disorders involve dysregulated immune signaling, and elimination diet studies have occasionally shown symptom improvement when nightshades are temporarily removed. While these studies are often small and not universally conclusive, they highlight that immune-mediated conditions can respond to dietary triggers in highly individualized ways. The absence of large-scale consensus does not invalidate patient experience, but it does emphasize the need for structured experimentation rather than assumption. Another factor to consider is cumulative exposure and preparation methods, because peeling potatoes reduces glycoalkaloid content, and avoiding sprouted or green potatoes significantly lowers alkaloid intake. Cooking methods can also influence concentration, although glycoalkaloids are relatively stable compared to some other plant compounds. This means that quality selection and storage practices are practical steps for reducing potential irritation without eliminating entire food groups unnecessarily. It is also important to separate correlation from causation, because inflammatory symptoms often fluctuate due to stress, sleep quality, overall dietary pattern, and physical activity levels. When nightshades are removed in the context of a broader dietary reset, improvements may reflect multiple simultaneous changes rather than a single compound. For this reason, clinicians who use elimination strategies typically recommend structured reintroduction phases to confirm whether symptoms return when the food is added back. From a scientific standpoint, nightshades are rich in vitamin C, carotenoids, potassium, and various phytonutrients that support cardiovascular and metabolic health, which is why blanket avoidance for the general population is not evidence-based. However, for individuals experiencing persistent joint pain, digestive discomfort, or autoimmune flare patterns, despite otherwise balanced nutrition, a temporary elimination under supervision can provide valuable diagnostic insight. Personalized nutrition acknowledges that immune sensitivity exists on a spectrum rather than a binary category. Understanding the role of alkaloids in inflammatory signaling reframes the conversation from labeling foods as universally inflammatory to recognizing individual variability in immune responsiveness. When you evaluate your symptoms systematically and adjust based on objective response rather than trend-driven fear, you move toward a more precise and sustainable approach to health. The science supports moderation, awareness, and individualized assessment rather than rigid dietary dogma. Many people increase their intake of raw vegetables, believing that uncooked automatically means cleaner and healthier, yet the digestive system does not evaluate food based on moral labels. It responds to chemistry and fermentable content. Raw vegetables are often high in complex fibers and fermentable carbohydrates known as FODMAPs, which stand for fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. These short-chain carbohydrates are poorly absorbed in the small intestine in certain individuals, allowing them to travel into the colon where they become fuel for bacterial fermentation. Fermentation itself is not inherently harmful because beneficial gut bacteria rely on fermentable fibers to produce short-chain fatty acids that support colon health and metabolic signaling. However, when fermentation occurs rapidly or in excessive amounts, gas production increases, drawing water into the colon and expanding intestinal volume, which can lead to bloating, abdominal pressure, and discomfort. Individuals with irritable bowel syndrome or altered gut motility are particularly sensitive to these effects because their nervous system amplifies normal digestive sensations into painful experiences. Raw cruciferous vegetables, onions, garlic, certain leafy greens, and even some seemingly mild vegetables contain fermentable compounds that can accumulate when consumed in large salads or green smoothies. Unlike cooked vegetables, raw forms retain rigid plant cell walls composed of cellulose and hemicellulose that require more mechanical and microbial breakdown. This structural complexity slows digestion in the small intestine and increases the amount of substrate delivered to colonic bacteria, intensifying gas production in susceptible individuals. Clinical research on low FODMAP diets demonstrates that reducing fermentable carbohydrate intake significantly decreases bloating and abdominal pain in people with functional bowel disorders. Randomized trials have shown measurable symptom improvement when high FODMAP foods are temporarily limited and then systematically reintroduced. These findings confirm that digestive discomfort is often a biochemical response rather than a psychological one, and that fiber tolerance varies widely between individuals. Cooking alters the physical and chemical properties of vegetables in ways that improve tolerability for many people. Heat softens plant cell walls, partially breaks down fiber structures, and reduces the fermentable load delivered intact to the colon. Steaming, sautéing, or lightly boiling vegetables can preserve most micronutrients while making them easier to digest and less likely to provoke excessive gas production. This modification does not diminish the nutritional value of vegetables, but it often enhances comfort and nutrient absorption in individuals with sensitive digestion. Another important factor is the speed at which dietary changes are implemented, because suddenly increasing fiber intake from low to high levels overwhelms the adaptive capacity of the gut microbiome. Bacterial populations require time to adjust to increased substrate. Availability and rapid shifts can create temporary imbalances that amplify fermentation and bloating. Gradual fiber increases allow microbial communities to adapt and expand in a controlled manner, reducing the intensity of symptoms. Hydration status and meal composition also influence digestive comfort, because adequate fluid intake supports fiber movement through the gastrointestinal tract and prevents excessive stagnation. Pairing vegetables with protein and healthy fats can moderate gastric emptying and reduce rapid fermentation by slowing carbohydrate delivery to the colon. These strategies reflect a systems-based approach to digestion rather than focusing on single foods in isolation. The essential insight is that bloating after raw vegetables does not mean vegetables are harmful, but it does indicate that the form, quantity, and individual tolerance threshold require attention. Digestive physiology operates on balance rather than ideology, and what nourishes one person effortlessly may challenge another depending on microbial composition and gut sensitivity. By aligning preparation methods and portion sizes with your unique digestive capacity, you transform vegetables from a source of discomfort into a sustainable foundation for long-term health. If certain vegetables can interfere with mineral absorption, thyroid signaling, or inflammatory balance in specific individuals, the solution is not permanent restriction, but strategic personalization grounded in physiology and evidence. Nutritional science consistently shows that health outcomes improve when diet aligns with individual tolerance, digestive capacity, and metabolic context, rather than rigid universal rules. The goal is to reduce unnecessary physiological stress while preserving nutrient density, diversity, and long-term sustainability. The first practical step is rotation rather than repetition, because consuming the same high oxalate greens or raw cruciferous vegetables every single day increases cumulative exposure to specific plant compounds. Rotating leafy greens such as romaine, arugula, bok choy, and mixed lettuces with lower oxalate content can significantly reduce overall load without eliminating vegetables entirely. Dietary diversity also supports microbiome resilience, which improves tolerance to a wider range of plant fibers and bioactive compounds over time. Preparation method is equally powerful because cooking alters the chemical structure and concentration of many plant compounds in measurable ways. Boiling high oxalate vegetables can reduce soluble oxalate content, while lightly steaming cruciferous vegetables lowers goitrogenic activity without destroying beneficial phytonutrients. Fermentation, soaking, and proper storage can further modify lectin and alkaloid content, demonstrating that how you prepare food can be as important as what you choose. Pairing vegetables strategically within meals enhances nutrient absorption and reduces unintended effects, especially in the context of mineral-binding compounds. Consuming calcium-containing foods alongside oxalate-rich vegetables can reduce oxalate absorption, while including healthy fats improves absorption of fat-soluble vitamins found in colorful produce. Adequate protein intake also supports gut barrier integrity and immune balance, which improves tolerance to plant compounds that might otherwise trigger sensitivity. Monitoring symptoms objectively is essential because vague dietary changes without structured observation often lead to confusion rather than clarity. A short-term elimination of suspected triggers followed by systematic reintroduction allows you to identify whether symptoms truly correlate with specific vegetables. This approach is widely used in clinical nutrition practice and avoids unnecessary long-term restriction based on assumption alone. Laboratory data can provide additional insight when symptoms persist despite dietary adjustments, particularly in the case of thyroid concerns or recurrent kidney stones. Measuring thyroid-stimulating hormone, free thyroid hormones, iodine status, and urinary oxalate levels can clarify whether vegetable intake is interacting with underlying vulnerability. Objective data transforms guesswork into informed decision-making and prevents overcorrection based on fear. Equally important is avoiding the psychological trap of labeling entire food groups as dangerous, because excessive restriction can reduce dietary quality and increase stress around eating. Chronic stress elevates cortisol, which influences inflammation, blood sugar regulation, and digestive function, potentially worsening the very symptoms individuals are attempting to solve. Sustainable health requires balance, flexibility, and evidence-based reasoning rather than reactionary avoidance. When you adjust vegetable intake intelligently, you preserve their powerful benefits while minimizing unintended strain on sensitive systems. Vegetables remain foundational to metabolic health, cardiovascular support, and cellular protection when consumed in amounts and forms that match your biology. Precision replaces panic, and awareness replaces blind adherence to trends. Outro. The message is not to fear vegetables, but to understand them deeply enough to use them wisely. When digestion improves, energy stabilizes, and symptoms resolve through thoughtful adjustment, you experience the difference between following advice and applying science. Stay curious about how your body responds, prioritize preparation and rotation, and remember that true health comes from informed balance rather than extremes.